Why is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band one of the greatest albums of all time? That's what I want to talk about in this video. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the vinyl record. I'm going to show you the copy that I have. Then I want to dive deeper into why this is one of the greatest albums of all time and talk about some other albums that were arguably influenced by Sgt. Pepper's. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with the vinyl record. What I like to do is I record this separately just because it looks better when I film it, when I point the camera directly at the vinyl instead of just like holding it up to the screen and taking everything out, because then it just gets awkward and everything. So I'm going to go to that part next. I'm going to show you my vinyl record, and then afterwards we're going to talk about why this is one of the greatest albums of all time. Okay, let's take a look at the vinyl with that iconic album cover that you've seen so many times, and I could do a whole video on this cover, but I won't. This is one of those albums that I think like everyone needs to own on vinyl. It's just one of the essentials. Here's the gatefold where you can open it up and see the four members, and on the back are lyrics printed. Kind of hard to see on my copy right here, but you can see the lyrics here, and this was something that was not done often back then. I don't think it's the first time it was ever done, but it was kind of innovative as not a lot of bands did it back then. What else is here? We got this kind of like this psychedelic sleeve here, but then here's another one that came with it. This came with my version. I'm not sure if it came with all the versions, but has some photos here and kind of gives you just a history of the album and all that stuff. And on the back it tells you actually who everyone is. Here's an insert that I know came with the original one. It's like a cutout mustache and just some things that you can cut out here and just different like things here. So just like a little cardboard. I know that one came in the original. And finally here is the vinyl. Let me take it out. So this has the Parlophone sticker with a 33 RPM, and it has the song. So this is actually side 2. Let me flip it over. And here is side 1 with the Parlophone sticker. So let's get back to the video. So why is Sgt. Pepper one of the greatest rock albums of all time? That's what we're going to talk about next. I'll be diving into lots of different aspects, such as the studio recording, the idea of the concept album, and things like that. Let's start with talking about the recording process. One thing characteristic about this album is that they spend a lot of time in the studio, given that they were not touring at the time. It was reported that they spent over 700 hours in the studio. They recorded the album at Abbey Road Studios and were accompanied by their producer, George Martin, and engineer, Geoff Emerick. It's pretty impressive that they were able to pull this off, considering it was recorded using 4-track technology, which means they did lots of multi-tracking and overdubbing, and not only that, they used a technique called Vari-Speed, which means they changed the tape speed to alter the pitch and tempo, and they also used something called artificial double tracking, also called ADT, and that helped create these richer sound textures. The album is filled with great songs. I want to focus on 2 of my favorites. First one is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. This song has these surreal, dreamlike lyrics written by John Lennon. It was inspired by a drawing of his son Julian, who made of his classmate Lucy. The lyrics are filled with vivid imagery and wordplay, and it really showed off John Lennon's creativity. Not only that, the song features a distinctive piano melody and incorporates various instruments such as the Lowrey organ and the tambura, and this created this unique sound. In addition, George Martin's production adds to the song's psychedelic atmosphere. It captured the spirit of the 1960s counterculture. It wasn't a typical pop song, and it pushed boundaries with its experimental nature. There was also the song A Day in the Life, featuring orchestras and pianos, and it gave it a very big and epic sound that was not heard at the time. In addition, most of the songs had many layers of instruments and vocals and different effects that created this very big soundscape. A Day in the Life is a masterpiece from the album, and here's some more reasons why I consider this in particular to be a great song. I would say it might even be one of the most innovative songs in the album. One reason is that it combines 2 distinct songs. We have John's I Read the News Today section and Paul's woke up, fell out of bed section. In other words, it has this very unique narrative structure. Then there are lyrics which tackle themes of mortality, social commentary, and the contrast between reality and dreams. Then the song ends with a 40-piece orchestra and a haunting chord progression. Therefore, A Day in the Life is often cited as one of the greatest songs ever recorded. It shows the Beatles' innovation and their ability to push the boundaries of popular music. In the next part of the video, I want to talk about how they blended different musical genres, how the songwriting made it memorable, and talk about whether or not it's a concept album. One reason why this is a great album is because it was one of the times that a rock band started to experiment with different genres. The album features diverse musical styles from rock and pop to music hall, vaudeville, western classical, Indian classical, and avant-garde. So for this reason, it was a very groundbreaking album. The Beatles have always been known for their songwriting. You have everything from songs written by Lennon and McCartney and some songs written by George Harrison. The album features lead vocals from all four members of the band. Not only that, but George Martin plays a big part on the album. He was the man behind the orchestral arrangements of the album, and that just added this other layer of sound which made the album stand out amongst so many others that were released at that time. Now let's discuss whether or not it's a concept album. I guess we can say it's loosely considered to be a concept album, and I use the word loosely because it's not a real kind of album that we know or that would come later on. But what's unique about this album is that the Beatles actually created these alter egos for this particular album, and that was something that was pretty cool. The album begins with a title track and reprises it near the end, creating this circular show-like feel. In other words, the reprise is track 11, and it serves as a curtain call before the epic finale, which is the aforementioned A Day in the Life. This in turn made it feel like a cohesive album. Another thing about this album is that the songs are strategically placed in the track listing so that it really feels like the song transition seamlessly goes from one to another. Later, I'm going to talk about some concept albums that were arguably influenced by this album, but before I do that, I want to talk about how this album influenced the music scene and was it actually released at a perfect time in history. So one important aspect of the album is that people started to take popular music seriously after this release. Before, it was just some teenage fad, but now it was this legitimate art form. Its success and critical acclaim demonstrated that popular music could be as ambitious and culturally significant as classical music or even literature. Another important thing about this album is that it defined the quote-unquote album era. This was one of those albums that was seen as a whole instead of a bunch of songs that featured a bunch of singles, and this led to more musicians trying to create albums that sounded more cohesive and led to more concept albums. The album is also considered to be a soundtrack of a generation as it was released at the height of the Summer of Love in 1967. I was not born when this album came out, but I'm sure there are people who could tell us stories about how important this one was when it was released. So if you were around at that time, please drop a comment, tell us some stories about when you first bought this or when it came out. So anyway, now in this final part of the video, I want to talk about how it was influential for other artists and other albums that came afterwards. The most obvious one is going to be the Rolling Stones, Their Satanic Majesty's Request from 1967. The Rolling Stones were always known as a blues rock band, but with this album they started playing psychedelic rock, and they did a lot of things that looked like direct copies of this album, as the concept and the costumes and what the band wore and the design of the album cover, and that's a whole other story of itself. I think it's a decent album, not my favorite album by the Stones. I like the popular songs like 2000 Man, which I learned from Ace Frehley. I like She's a Rainbow and 2000 Light Years from Home, but the album can be a little weird. But another one, which is a good example of being influenced, is Moody Blues, Days of Future Past from 1967. It was only released a few months after Sgt. Pepper, and one big example of its influence was how they incorporated classical elements into the music. The album features a full orchestral suite, alongside rock songs. In turn, the album was a very cohesive, conceptual journey that's about like one single day. So that this album is often cited as a foundational album for progressive rock. And I have to confess, I actually listened to this for the first time today. I knew the one song, that Nights in White Satin. I mean, that's a big hit and all, but this is the first time I ever listened to it front to back, and it's a really good album. I'm going to have to pick it up on vinyl one day, but it's really great. Now, another album, or another example, would be The Zombies with Odyssey and Oracle from 1968. This one was not as successful as Sgt. Pepper, but you could tell from the different things they did, the harmonies, the arrangements, there is some influence here. It's a psychedelic pop album. It was very popular. It has that hit, Time of the Season. And another one I listened to today, which is pretty good. Another good example would be The Byrds, the notorious Byrd Brothers from 1968. And this one has elements of psychedelic rock, country, folk, and they use the same advanced studio techniques and tape manipulation and dreamlike atmospheres, reminiscent of the way Sgt. Pepper did in the studio. And there was also Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, We're Only in It for the Money from 1968. This was a satire of the hippie movement and its perceived commercialization, which is actually a parody of Sgt. Pepper itself. And another one I listened to today, I've never really listened to Frank Zappa before. It's a very weird album. He's just a strange guy. So if you like weird stuff, listen to Frank Zappa, but it's kind of out there. And finally, one more pick would be Queen's Night at the Opera from 1975. Another example of the band pushing the boundaries of studio recording, multi-tracking, genre hopping, Bohemian Rhapsody. That's really all I need to say about this album, and this has all of those vocal harmonies and arrangements. So let me know in the comments, what are some albums you feel were influenced by Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? In the meantime, check this out again, and check out this video right here. Thanks for watching. Please give it a like. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe if you're not already. On this channel, I do videos related to physical media, and thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.